pretend where all men are created equal, and where all of us know that that's not true. Because none of us are actually naive enough to believe in absolute equality. Sure, we strive for it. We fight for it even in some instances, because we know that in an ideal world, it should be. We should all be equal, but we are not. Our rights are not. Our expectations are not. And now, neither are our crimes. Because in 1969, the U.S. government enacted the Federal Hate Crimes Law, which made some crimes, mainly those committed out of hate, as the law's name would suggest, punishable by more severe penalties than others. This law, as much as it did for equality, and as well intended as it is limited, and it is inconsistent, and it is especially inconsistent in the case of rape. Unarguably a heinous crime, rape is second to the FBI only to murder. And according to the U.S. Department of Justice, it is the least charged of all hate crimes. Despite the fact that it is largely supported that rape, especially in serial cases, is primarily motivated by hate. It is this inconsistency, this failure to recognize rape as a hate crime, that is cause for alarm. We need to charge rape as the hate crime that it is more consistently. And the only way to do that is to change the current federal statute. What is the current federal hate crime statute? It's important to note that it does not create an offense. Merely it adds a charge to an existing crime that is committed on the basis of hate. So that if you murder, first, we charge you with murder. And if we come to find that your murder was driven by hate, then we charge you with a hate crime on top of it. So that this crime is not one of action, but rather of motivation. And there are certain motivations that are sanctioned by the FBI. According to the Department of Justice's current federal hate crime statute, it defines a hate crime as a criminal offense committed against a person, property, or society in which the offender was driven by a bias against race, religion, sexual orientation, disability, or ethnicity. That is all. Those are the only things that we can be biased against. Those are the only 5 things that we can hate. Notably missing from that list is gender. It is widely accepted and supported by sociologists, psychologists, and criminologists that one of the primary motivators for rape, especially serial rape, is the mere hatred of women. But the federal government has continued to overlook this as a possible hate crime bias. But this is where the inconsistency in the law begins to play in our favor, because certain states can add to these biases on their own. And gender has become a bias in 31 states. Let me rephrase. Gender has become a bias in only 31 states. It is this inconsistency that is the fundamental issue at hand. In order to do justice for the victims of hate-motivated rapes, gender must become a federally sanctioned bias. The bias does not change from state to state. The law shouldn't either. We have to take this out of the hands of the state and put it into the hands of the federal government. And we can do it. We have done it before. In 2009, the U.S. enacted the Matthew Shepard Hate Crime Prevention Act that simply added sexual orientation to the FBI's list of then 4 biases. We can do it again with gender. We can add gender to the list of biases, and in line with the current hate crime law, it will not create a new law. It will merely add severity to the already existing statutes. No crime in and of itself is a hate crime. In the same way, adding gender will not make any rape automatically a gender-motivated hate crime. Merely it will allow us to charge these crimes as such when it is appropriate. While this could apply to one-time offenses, it more than likely applies to serial cases where victim patterns and motivations can clearly be established. This won't fundamentally change any of the existing law, but it will give gender and the victims of hate-motivated rape the respect that they deserve. And make no mistake, these victims, and rape as a crime itself, deserves our respect. In 2008, the FBI estimated over 90,000 forcible rapes committed, and the U.S. Department of Justice logged over 9,000 hate crimes. With such a large number of forcible rapes committed, one would assume that this would be a large percentage of the statistic. But in actuality, rape was only charged as a hate crime 11 times. And in all 11 of these rapes, even the ones that were committed in states that allowed gender to be recognized as a bias, all 11 of these were charged on the basis of another bias. Gender was never the issue. This law, the way that it is currently written and the way that it is currently being employed, is letting people down. The inclusion of gender as a bias will do what the inclusion of every other bias has done. It will see to serve justice for the victims, which is what the federal hate crime law has aimed to do from the very beginning. Serve justice and ensure that there is equal protection under the law for everyone. More importantly, the federal hate crime law was enacted to show that we as a country will not tolerate hate. But in not including gender as a bias, in leaving the hate crime law as it is, we are merely creating acceptable hate. We may not be supporting rape as a crime, but we are doing just as badly by turning the other cheek to the motivation and saying that it's okay. If the government is going to define the bias, they should do it more extensively and offer justice to every victim. Rape is predominantly motivated by hate, namely the hate of women. And as long as gender is excluded from the federally accepted biases, victims of these crimes will not know justice, and these offenders will continue to get away with federally sanctioned hate. By not recognizing gender, the government looks like it's doing one of two things. It is either saying that people do not commit crimes based on hate of gender, or it is saying that it really just doesn't care. I don't want to believe either of those two things. But I can't help but wonder why, knowing the motivation behind these crimes, the government continues to ignore gender as a possible hate crime bias. I cannot stand up here and tell you with any certainty that every rape is a hate crime. I know that it's not. I can't even give you a rough statistic on how many are. But I can tell you this. Whatever the motivation behind the rape, none of them, ever, were committed out of love.